Hello and welcome. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Cardinals are due to meet today following the death of Pope Francis yesterday, with plans being made for his funeral later this week. The Vatican says that Pope Francis died of a stroke and heart failure after battling serious health issues in recent months. Palestinian officials report that a new Gaza ceasefire deal that is 5 to 7 years long has been proposed by Qatar and Egypt. It would see the release of all Israeli hostages and a complete Israeli withdrawal as further deadly strikes are reported in the enclave. Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed bilateral talks with Ukraine for the first time since the early days of the war. It comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he is eager to discuss a halt to attacks on civilian targets. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to arrive in Saudi Arabia for a landmark two-day visit, following invitations from the Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister. Defence, energy and investment ties are expected to be discussed. Meanwhile, US Vice President J.D. Vance has visited Amber Fort in Jaipur on the second day of his India visit. Vance and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral talks at the PM's residence with discussions over a new and modern trade agreement. "27 people, the US government says, are current or former members of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang and have been charged under the RICO Act. Trump's administration had previously deported alleged gang members to El Salvador using a seldom used wartime law. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has backed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth over reports of a second Yemen strike signal chat leak. Meanwhile, the White House has denied reports that it is looking to replace Hegseth amid the ongoing controversy. Harvard has sued to block US President Donald Trump from freezing $2.3 billion in federal funding. The university had rejected a list of White House demands after Trump's administration raised concern over pro-Palestinian protests on campus. We start off with Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi, who is embarking on a two-day visit to Saudi Arabia beginning today. He will arrive in Jeddah, marking his first ever visit to the kingdom's commercial capital. The visit aims to deepen bilateral ties between New Delhi and Riyadh. Modi will hold high-level talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. PM Modi and the Crown Prince are set to co-chair the second meeting of the India-Saudi Arabia Strategic Partnership Council during the visit. According to the Indian ambassador in Saudi Arabia, a large number of memorandums of understanding are expected to be signed, with key discussions centred on strengthening economic ties, bolstering defence cooperation. The leaders are also expected to discuss the implementation of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor and exchange views on pressing global issues, including the Israel-Hamas conflict and the war in Ukraine. Modi will also be interacting with the Indian community. The visit marks a pivotal moment in Indo-Saudi relations. Well, joining us to discuss what we can expect from this meeting and this visit from Prime Minister Narendra Modi over the next couple of days is Uday Pratap Singh, a senior editor with NewsX, who's joining us live from Jeddah. Uday, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. What can you tell us about these upcoming meetings and the overall two-day visit as a whole?
Well, absolutely, Josh. In fact, we are currently at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Jeddah, where Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be staying. He has emplaned Saudi Arabia. He's, of course, departed from New Delhi. He will be arriving in Saudi Arabia around 12:30 local time, which would be about 3 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And, of course, after 45 minutes of that, he will be arriving at this very hotel here the Ritz-Carlton in Jeddah. As you can see, the Corniche area is right behind me. That's, of course, the beach. And over there are flags of India and Saudi Arabia, which have been put up, of course, signifying the close relations between the two countries. There are a host of programs, of course, scheduled for the Prime Minister today. He's all set, sources tell us, to be meeting with some senior journalists of Arab publications. He's also given an interview, in fact, to Arab News on the eve of his visit to Saudi Arabia. Also, there will be a key meeting of the Prime Minister with the Indian diaspora today in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel itself in the evening. That's something, of course, the PM always does on his visits abroad, interacts with the Indian diaspora, and, of course, they have started arriving already at this very hotel for that meeting. There's also then, of course, the highly anticipated bilateral meeting with Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman. That will be taking place this evening, in fact, at the Royal Palace here. In fact, there's a state banquet as well that Mohammed bin Salman is hosting for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That will follow the bilateral meeting this evening. Of course, a host of issues expected to be discussed, including trade, energy, defense cooperation, and of course also that much anticipated IMEEC that you were talking about. Of course, there is a corridor, in fact, which was announced during the G20 summit in 2023, which India had, of course, chaired. Well, Saudi Arabia also proposed free trade agreements. The parameters for that also likely to be, of course, outlined during this visit as well. This is the third visit by PM Modi to Saudi Arabia since he has become Prime Minister in 2014 of India, and of course follows a visit by Mohammed bin Salman as well to India a couple of years ago.
Yes, Uday, of course, you've spoken about the conversations that are going to take place, but this is all, of course, on the backdrop of geopolitical uncertainty. You've mentioned defence there. How important are these negotiations amid uncertain times across the world?
Well, absolutely. These negotiations, of course, are very, very crucial and important. Remember, of course, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor is, of course, going to be a very strategic and important corridor for trade, for investment, and, of course, for movement between like-minded thinking countries in the Middle East, in Asia, and, of course, in Europe. Remember, it's also being looked at as a sort of alternative to the One Belt, One Road initiative proposed by China, which is why, of course, it is very, very crucial for the global south. So the fact, of course, is that it was announced in 2023, but it is expected that it will be, further solidified. The parameters for that also sort of, the timelines will be set out during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Saudi Arabia this time around. Remember, there are two conflicts, of course, which are happening in the world of today, Russia and Ukraine, and Israel and Hamas. Those are also something that could figure in the talks, of course, between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Mohammed bin Salman, particularly given the fact that about the role as well that the Middle East has tried to play in bringing about, of course, a solution to the conflict. So that is also something, of course, that we can expect. Remember, defense cooperation as well. The Prime Minister has a special connect with the Middle East. That is something that we can, of course, expect also to be touched on. Apart from that, energy as well. Remember, the Middle East is, of course, a very, very important, and Saudi Arabia in particular, for India's energy needs. That's something, of course, that we can also expect to be as well, cooperation. That is, again, something that is on the agenda. Remember, as I was telling you earlier, a proposed free trade agreement is something that the Prime Minister has spoke about and could be inked, of course, during this visit. See now, members of the Indian diaspora have begun to arrive here in, of course, the Ritz-Carlton, Jeddah. These are, of course, people who are gathering already for that meeting. Hello, how are you?
Welcome, Modi ji, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Where have you come from?
I'm from Gujarat, Baroda.
Okay.
The city belongs to Modi.
Yes.
And he was elected.
Where do you live here?
2001 here.
In Jeddah?
In Jeddah.
Okay.
24 years. Very heartily welcome to Mr. Modi.
Yes.
He's our honorable Prime Minister.
Okay.
Welcome, Modi ji.
You have dressed up specially also for the occasion?
Yeah. Yeah, we are from Gujarat. Straight from Riyadh. And really very excited to meet Modi ji because it's a great opportunity for us as Indians to meet him, and he's like a father figure to us. Really, we are
I think you've got a lot of Gujarati snacks there, of course, Terry. Local snacks, oh, local sweets. Local sweets. And you've also got the Indian flag colors I can see here.
Yeah, today is a very proud moment for everyone, especially for us. We came from Riyadh. Last night we came here, and since this visit will another milestone for the Indian governments and also the Saudi government to make new further relation, strengthening the relation. So we are looking
How
forward.
proud a moment is it for you that to see the Indian flag flying here at the Corniche?
Yes, yes. Yes, we are.
One at a time, one at a time.
Yes, yeah, we are all except Dammam, Jeddah. So I am coming from Dammam, from IOF and GISA, Global India, Saudi Arabia, and from Karnataka, Mangalore.
Okay. How important is this visit, and also how hopeful are you that India-Saudi Arabia relations will get strengthened?
We are more excited to see Modi ji, and we are expecting more friendly and business and bilateral relations. We should be more helpful and more strengthy and more stronger.
Yes. This is something that the Prime Minister always does. He makes it a point to interact with the Indian diaspora wherever he goes abroad.
Yeah, the biggest diaspora in the Saudi Arabia, you can compare it in the fingers. The first community comes from the India. Is the Indian community is almost 2.5 million Indians are staying there. They are the most friendly of nations. Why we have been treated in Saudi Arabia is like the community and the strengthened relationships, which bonds and which increases the trade as well as the relations. Now they have started celebrating yoga in the Saudi Arabia with help of Modi ji. That's a yoga day is getting celebrated.
So these, of course, are some excited members of the Indian diaspora, Josh, who, of course, are waiting for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to catch a glimpse of him, and also, of course, awaiting, what he will speak to them about at that interaction with the diaspora, which, of course, is scheduled for this evening today.
Uday Pradap Singh, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, those diplomatic meetings will be taking place, and everything that comes from those we will be reporting here from NewsX World. We move on now, and US Vice President J.D. Vance and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi praised progress in trade talks during Vance's visit to New Delhi. Both leaders are aiming to finalise a deal within the 90-day pause on US tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. Vance, accompanied by his family, met Modi to discuss trade, energy, defence and strategic technology cooperation while addressing shared concerns over China. The visit comes amid a growing US-China trade war, with India navigating a careful diplomatic path. Both sides are working to resolve issues surrounding tariffs, with India open to reducing tariffs on half of its US imports. Bilateral trade reached $129 billion in 2024, with India seeking a fairer trade agreement with its largest trade partner. They unveil the terms of reference for a US-India bilateral trade agreement, focusing on reducing barriers like high tariffs and regulatory restrictions, which have led to a $45.7 billion of US goods trade deficit with India. The agreement is part of President Trump's America First trade policy, aiming to boost US jobs and long-term growth. Well, of course, J.D. Vance is continuing his visit today in India after meeting with Modi, who, of course, has headed to Saudi Arabia now for those conversations. Moving on now, and Pope Francis, the head of 1.4 billion Catholics, passed away at the age of 88 after suffering a stroke and heart failure, the Vatican have announced. Cardinals will meet today to decide the date for Pope Francis's funeral, with a conclave to elect a new pope to follow within 3 weeks. Tributes have flooded in globally, and his home country of Argentina has declared a week of mourning, while India began 3 days of state mourning. Meanwhile, heads of state and royalty are expected at the funeral, set to be held at St. Peter's Basilica. US President Donald Trump has already confirmed his attendance, describing Francis as a good man who loved the world. The funeral is expected to take place between the 25th of April and the 27th of April, with cardinals meeting in general congregations to finalise the details. The Pope's body was moved to Santa Marta Chapel and will lie in state at St. Peter's Basilica starting the 23rd of April. Francis, who chose a simple tomb, will be buried in Rome's Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, becoming the first pope in over 100 years to be laid to rest outside of the Vatican. Francis, the first pope from the Americas, was known for advocating social justice, peace and environmental protection. His views, though popular, faced opposition within the church. He pushed for reforms, particularly in governance and the role of women, and worked to address the church's child sex abuse crisis, though some victims' groups felt more could have been done. Thousands gathered at St. Peter's Square to pay their respects, remembering his message of inclusion and love for all people. We head now to the Middle East, and mediators from Qatar and Egypt have proposed the new ceasefire plan aiming to bring an end to months of violence in Gaza. According to a senior Palestinian official, the deal includes a longer truce lasting 5 to 7 years, release of all Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, and a complete Israeli military withdrawal from Gaza. Hamas has signalled a major shift, saying it's ready to hand over governance of Gaza to a nationally and regionally agreed Palestinian entity, possibly the Palestinian Authority. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected any role for the PA and insists the war will only end with Hamas's destruction. Meanwhile, according to Gaza's health ministry, Israeli airstrikes have killed 7 more civilians and destroyed multiple homes. About 24 living hostages and the bodies of more than 30 others are believed to still be held in Gaza, according to Israeli officials. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed powerful response to anyone attacking Israel. Let's listen to his comments.
אז אני מבקש לומר שני דברים לחות'ים ולכל מבקשי נפשנו. אחד, ברוח הדברים שפתחתי בהם, כל מתקפה עלינו לא תעבור בהבלגה. תהיה תגובה תקיפה, וישנה תגובה תקיפה מאוד. זה בלבנון, זה בעזה, זה בכל מקום.
Well, we move now to Israel directly, and in a dramatic twist in Israel's internal political crisis, Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of trying to fire him for refusing to show personal loyalty and for resisting pressure to spy on anti-government protesters. In a public affidavit submitted to Israel's Supreme Court, Bar claims Netanyahu repeatedly pushed him to act against protest leaders and to put loyalty to the Prime Minister above the rulings of the Supreme Court during a potential constitutional crisis. The affidavit is part of a court case challenging Netanyahu's attempt to remove Bar from office, a move the Supreme Court has temporarily blocked. Bar also alleged his dismissal was linked to his investigation into Netanyahu aides over security breaches and classified leaks. Netanyahu's office has denied the claims, calling the affidavit false and politically motivated. We now move over to Europe, and in a major shift since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed bilateral talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The offer comes as the US, Ukraine and key European allies gather in London to push for an unconditional ceasefire. Putin said that Russia remains open to discussions and emphasised avoiding strikes on civilian targets. The Kremlin clarified that bilateral talks could cover these issues directly with Kyiv. Let's listen in to the Russian president.
С этим нужно разобраться. Это все предмет для такого тщательного исследования. Может быть, и в двустороннем порядке. В результате дела мы этого не исключаем. Так что мы все это проанализируем и будем принимать. Что касается предложения не бить по объектам гражданской инфраструктуры, с этим надо разобраться. Ну, например, вот всем хорошо известен удар наших вооруженных сил по Конгресс-центру, по-моему, Сумского университета. Гражданский это объект или нет? Гражданский. Но там проходило награждение тех, кто совершил преступления в...
Well, President Zelensky in his nightly address confirmed Ukraine is ready for dialogue, but but insisted Moscow must commit to ending attacks on civilians. This follows repeated ceasefire violations, including during Russia's proposed Easter truce, which Ukraine claimed was breached over 1,000 times, a similar rhetoric that was echoed by Russia. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and special Trump envoys will meet top officials from France, Germany, the United Kingdom and Ukraine in London this week to move negotiations forward. Moving to North America now, and United States President Donald Trump has backed his defence chief Pete Hegseth despite a new scandal over his reported use of the messaging app Signal to potentially discuss US strikes on Yemen with his wife and others. He has branded the conversation as a waste of time and said that the Pentagon chief is doing a great job. The controversy comes a month after a journalist was added to a Signal group chat in which US cabinet officials, including Hegseth, discussed plans to attack Houthi rebels in Yemen. In this second Signal chat, Hegseth has shared information about airstrikes against Yemen, according to media sources. The chat reportedly included his wife, his brother, his lawyer and others without any security clearance. According to these reports, the group also included two of Hegseth's senior advisors, Dan Caldwell and Darren Selnick, who were fired last week for allegedly leaking unauthorised information. The Pentagon has denied the claims, calling them false and politically motivated. Hegseth has also remained defiant and blamed the media for the controversy. We stay in North America, and Harvard has sued Donald Trump's administration amid the ongoing fight between the university and the president. The US president has threatened several universities over claims that they tolerated anti-Semitism on campus and threatened their budgets, tax-exempt status and the enrolment of foreign students. For Harvard, he said to review the $9 billion in federal funding. The university specifically wants to halt a freeze on $2.3 billion in grants. The Ivy League university said in a lawsuit filed in a Massachusetts federal court that the case involves the government's efforts to use the withholding of federal funding as leverage to gain control of academic decision-making at Harvard. The lawsuit also named several other institutions targeted by Trump. The complaint called Trump's actions arbitrary and capricious and said that the government's actions flout not just the First Amendment, but also federal laws and regulations. We move north from the United States now, and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who is leading in the polls in the run-up to an April 28th election, has renewed calls for voters to give him a strong mandate to deal with US President Donald Trump's tariff threats. Carney has said that Trump's tariffs and talk of annexation pose a huge threat and mean that Canada needs to reduce its reliance on the United States and restructure its economy. The official opposition Conservatives had been 20 points ahead at the turn of the year, but now trail the Liberals. According to reports, a poll released on Monday puts the Liberals on 43.7% of public support, with the Conservatives down at 36.3%. The left-leaning New Democrats, who compete with the Liberals for the centre-left vote, trailed at 10.7%. Moving away from North America now, and early voting has officially begun in Australia ahead of the crucial May the 3rd election, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's centre-left Labour Party holding a narrow lead over the opposition coalition. As many as half of all eligible Australians are expected to vote early or by post, reflecting a growing participation in the country's electoral process. The start of voting comes at a challenging time for opposition leader Peter Dutton. Dutton's popularity has dipped amid criticism over controversial policy proposals and comparisons to US President Donald Trump. Also, Albanese has gained ground in recent polls, with the latest figures showing Labour ahead by 4 points under Australia's preferential voting system. Despite the lead, the Prime Minister Albanese has urged caution reminding voters of the surprise result in the 2019 election, wherein a Labour victory was anticipated, but the elections were ultimately won by the Liberals. Both the leaders, Dutton and Albanese, are set to face off in their final televised debate on Tuesday evening as campaigning continues, although in a more subdued manner following the death of Pope Francis. Moving on now, and in a key diplomatic move, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi will visit China on Tuesday, just days ahead of the third round of nuclear talks with the United States set for this weekend in Oman. Iranian officials say the visit is part of regular consultations with key allies, Russia and China, both of whom have played central roles in past nuclear negotiations. Tehran says it aims to lift US sanctions in exchange for limits on its nuclear program, a deal Washington withdrew from in 2018 during President Donald Trump's first term. Araghchi's trip comes amid rising tensions as Trump's administration has reimposed heavy sanctions and, for the first time, targeted Chinese teapot refineries that import Iranian oil. China, which now buys over 75% of Iran's crude exports, has not confirmed details of the visit. Staying in the Indo-Pacific, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon are set to strengthen defence and security ties in their meeting, with a focus on enhancing support for Ukraine. The leaders will witness the training of Ukrainian forces by the armies of both nations in southwest England. Luxon expected to confirm New Zealand's support for the initiative through the end of the year. They will also discuss plans to advance defence cooperation, including the creation of a new joint defence partnership. Starmer emphasised the long-standing cooperation between the UK and New Zealand, maintaining global peace and stability. He highlighted efforts to bolster national and economic security, citing increased defence spending, joint naval deployments in the Indo-Pacific, and continued support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Moving back now to North America, and a US judge has expressed concerns about the Trump administration's deportation process for Venezuelan migrants. US District Judge Charlotte Sweeney questioned whether the notices given to migrants detained at Texas's Blue Bonnet detention facility adequately informed them of their rights to challenge their deportation in court. Sweeney noted that the notices failed to mention habeas corpus, the legal avenues detainees can use to contest their detention. The case revolves around a provision from the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which the Trump administration invoked to expedite the deportation of alleged members of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang. The American Civil Liberties Union is representing the migrants, urging the US Supreme Court to maintain a block on their deportation until proper notice and an important opportunity to challenge their removals are provided. Judge Sweeney is expected to rule by Tuesday on whether the deportations should proceed. With that, it is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring all of the latest international news very soon.